There is a legend about a woman who became Pope. Pope Joan looked just like a man. She talked like a man. She was educated like a man. And she became a priest, was very intelligent, was quickly promoted, and became Pope in the year 855. She served for just under 3 years, and then the legend fractures. There are 3 possible endings to the story. In one ending, Pope Joan dies, and after she dies, it is discovered that he was a she. In another ending, Pope Joan gives birth to a baby, and the church quickly sequesters her, hides her away, and another man steps into place as Pope. And in the third possible ending, Pope Joan is trying to mount a horse, goes into labor, has the baby, and the enraged crowd, who is so upset by this deception, ties her to the horse, drags her through the streets, and stones her to death. And the child grows up to become a bishop. Now, most scholars agree that this legend was a bit of satirical work. People who believed that it happened lived in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, but now we believe that somebody was just making fun of the papacy, and that legend is just a legend. However, the legend that followed it is even more unusual. Supposedly, the church was so embarrassed by Pope Joan that they created this papal chair. It was a beautiful wooden throne, carved and ornate, and every pope had to sit in this chair at least once, because the chair had an opening in the bottom. And the cardinal who drew the short straw had to look under the chair when the pope was seated in it to make sure that he had the proper equipment for the job. This chair supposedly exists somewhere. In your spare time, you all can look this up and let me know what you find. Now today is the beginning of June, it's the beginning of Pride Month, and we still, in 2025, are overly obsessed with people's parts. We are hearing a lot of talk about male and female, men are men and women are women, and that's it. The Bible says it, that settles it, we believe it. If you're a man, you go in the men's room, if you're a woman, you go in the women's room, and what's all this discussion about it, right? Well, I think maybe we should talk about it a little bit, and we will. We're going to get to Genesis, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we can interpret from the Bible. And first, I want to tell you a story that's true, okay? You can believe this one. This story is about a person named Austin Harkney. And Austin is a preacher and an author, and I was able to hear one of his sermons a couple weeks ago. He preached at the Festival of Homiletics in Atlanta, and it was live streamed, so I was able to watch his presentation. And he has a very unusual story, and it's a compelling story. So I want to share a little bit about Austin with all of you today. When Austin was born, the doctor said, "It's a girl." 25 years later, Austin said, "No, it isn't." He went on to write a book about transgender adults and Christians, and the book is called Transforming: The Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. He is a person of faith. He was raised in a Christian home. He was the oldest of 3 daughters. They were homeschooled. They went to church every single Sunday, and he learned at church that people who call themselves LGBTQ are somehow needing to be repaired. They were broken, they were sinful, and the church really didn't like them much, didn't accept them. Now, Austin was a tomboy. In all the pictures of him as a child, short hair, t-shirt, shorts, baseball bat, he said later he really didn't know how to feel like a girl. His sisters felt like girls, acted like girls, and he never felt the same way they did. When he was in high school, he developed a crush, as we often do when we're in high school. His crush was on his best friend, who was a girl. And then later, he developed a crush on a boy. And then a light bulb kind of went off in his head. as a high schooler, he realized that he was part of that LGBTQ community. He was bisexual, he thought. And he immediately came out to his family. He came out to his church. And I don't know how they all took it, but I do know that Austin then had to go looking for another church. And he went to one that was a little more progressive, not exactly affirming, but at least not hostile. And he continued to study the Bible. He loved his faith. He loved his church and continued to be who he was. In a high school, he was the person who wore the rainbow shoelaces, was very outgoing, very friendly to everybody. He went on to college, and during college he realized that there was still something about him that he didn't quite understand. It was like a piece of luggage that he carried with him that he never really opened, didn't take the time to understand what was there. And when he graduated from college, he thought, I should go to seminary, because people go to seminary to find out all the answers to their questions about God and life and why God made me the way I am. Well, for those of us who went to seminary, you'll get a few answers, but you'll probably come out with more questions than you had before you went in. But Austin did go on to seminary, and in his senior year, still showing the world an outward expression as a female, he realized that that baggage he'd been carrying, that suitcase that he didn't want to look into, was his gender, because he knew that he was male. Even though his outward anatomy was female, he always felt like he was a male. But he didn't come out as transgender because he was afraid the seminary would not give him his certificate, his master's in theology. So he waited until the day after graduation. As soon as he was sure he had his degree, because he had put in the work and he owed a lot of money for it, then he changed his outward expression of his gender and came out as a transgender person. Now today we talk a lot about gender, but I have a feeling we have very little understanding of it. And in Austin's book and in the many interviews that I watched over the past couple of weeks with him, he teaches us what gender is. So I want to share with you a few definitions, just so we know what we're talking about, because this is Pride Month, and we still are overly obsessed with people's body parts and what they do with them. So let's talk about a couple of basic definitions. Don't worry, it won't get too embarrassing, I don't think. The first one is sexuality. Sexuality is simply who you're attracted to. It's your romantic relationships. That's all it is. Now, I can remember seeing forms, maybe at the doctor's office or somewhere, that said sex, M, F, and now you'll see, I'm not going to tell you. That's your other choice, right? They are not asking about your sexuality. This is a modern day Pope chair, right? They just want to know, what was your assigned gender at birth? What does your body tell us about what you are? Male, female, or I'm not going to tell you. That's not gender. Gender is 3 parts, according to Austin. The first is your body. But it is all of your body, not just one part or your reproductive parts. It's also your chromosomes. It's also your hormone levels. It's even your brain matter. There is a lot of parts of the body that contribute to gender, much more than the part the doctor looks at when you're born. That's one part. The second part of it is your gender identity. Austin never felt like a girl, wasn't really sure what he was supposed to feel like, but knew he didn't feel like his sisters did. That gender identity is an internal thing. And I think when people tell us who they are, maybe we should just listen to them, because they're the only ones that know. Now, the third part is your gender expression, and that's what you show the world, how you portray your gender to everybody else. And this is cultural, and it changes over time. In fact, the whole concept of gender changes, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. But gender expression certainly, clearly, is cultural. So let me give you an example. If we invited one of the founding fathers of the United States into our service this morning, if he came in, he would be wearing a wig, He would have lots of ruffles on his blouse. He would be wearing capri pants. They used to call them knickers or breeches. He'd be wearing tights and shoes with heels. Now, that does not say masculinity to us today, does it? And women at that time would wear long dresses, long hair, long sleeves, high necks. But as I look at the women around here today, how many of us have short hair and we're wearing pants, right? So these things change. In fact, I'm just reminded of a lot of men, young men in particular, just a few years ago, that all had a man bun and a crossbody bag. That's how gender expression changes. You can go somewhere else in the country and see completely different expressions of gender. It is fluid. It changes. But the way the body determines gender is also changing because of science. How many of you sat in a biology class in high school or middle school and they said, if you have XX chromosomes, you're a girl. If you have XY, you're a boy. That's what I was taught. Well, today science tells us there are many more combinations than that. You can be XXY or XYY or just X. And your hormone levels can be very different. Your testosterone and your estrogen levels can change. And all of this is formed when God sees you in the womb. Psalm 139, when God sees our unformed bodies, that's when all of this is happening. Before a child is born. Gender is complex, and it becomes even more complex for folks who are intersex, and this is our last definition for today. Intersex people have attributes, characteristics that do not fall strictly along male and female lines. They are mixed. You may not ever know you are intersex, and you might be. Now, the percentage of the population that are intersex is 1.7%. Sounds like not very many people. However, it's the same number as the number of natural redheads in the United States. It's also more than 1 out of 100. So think about the 100 people you know in your community, and one of them is probably intersex. And they might not know it. They might present their identity, their expression, their reproductive parts may all look aligned. But if you've seen the movie Conclave, you'll know that there are other alternatives to that we do not see and we don't understand. So it's complicated, right? Which restroom is the dragon going to go into? The best thing to do is to ask the dragon, right? Now, what does the Bible say about all this? As we look at Genesis chapter 1, and we're just going to stay there today, we're not going to go into Romans. In Genesis chapter 1, we have a poem. It's a beautiful piece of literature that poetically tells about the creation of the world. It has poetic meter. It has a rhythm to it. God said, and so it was, and it was the first day. God said, and so it was, and it was the second day. And God's act of creating is mostly separating. God separates the light from the dark. God separates the dry land and the water. Now, I want you to think about those categories. They provide structure for the story, right? But as we think about light and dark, how separate is it at twilight or at dawn? When it's dusk, when it's sundown, and the sun is just about gone, and most of the sky is dark, where's that dividing line? Can we stand over here and be in light and then step across a line and suddenly be in dark? Or is there a whole spectrum in between? And what about the land and the water? What about the swamps and the marshes? What about the beach, that part where you're walking and your toes are squishing through the wet sand? Is that dry ground or is that water? Where's the dividing line? Or is it a spectrum between light and dark, and between dry ground and the sea? And look at the tablecloth. The Alpha and the Omega. Let's go back to Revelation for just a moment, because in Revelation 22, Jesus said, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So is Jesus Lord of only the first and the last? Or of all of us in between? Is Jesus only the Alpha and the Omega, or all the characters in between? Now, I mentioned a few moments ago the movie Conclave because there's such a wonderful quote in that movie. Several of you have suggested to me that I should watch that movie, and I did. It was very good. It's about how we choose, or how the next pope is chosen, and I thought it was compelling to watch. There is a quote in that movie at the end when the person who will be elected pope says, "The church is not tradition. The church is not the past. The church is what we do next." So, church, what do we do next? We could drain all the swamps and marshes so we have a better division between the dry ground and the water. We could outlaw all of the unisex bathrooms and make men go to men's and women's go to women's room. We could bring back the Pope chair. I think there's probably some who would like to do that. Or we could appreciate the differences that we all bring and call everybody, just as God called it, holy.